You're listening to Minds of Forestry by Tyler Dennis. Good evening, everyone, or morning, depending when you're listening to this. So today's episode is going to be called, or it is called, Officer's Field. Essentially, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to talk to you about the office work compared to the field work. And in my line of work, there can be lots of both or a little bit of both. And currently, right now, I'm dealing with quite a good mix. So I thought it would be good to sit down and actually discuss the differences between the two aspects of the job, because it's not just all out and about in the bush. I do get time to sit down in the office and actually sit in front of a computer and be not brain numb, but essentially just kind of sit around. Essentially, the differences between the two, obviously, office being, I get to sit around, I get to look at a computer, I get to just kind of be my own person, do my own work. But, I get to do that in the field as well, because being in the field, there's so much more information that I have to collect. So that way, whenever I'm in the office, I don't have to second guess any of the information that was brought to me. And, ideally, it comes right down to field work being kind of the most important part of the job, mostly because that's where the data collection is. That's where I'm going out. That's where I'm gaining all of this information that I can then put down in a spreadsheet or an information report. Most of my office work results in reconnaissance, timber reconnaissance. And I get to sit down after I'm done in the field. I sit down and do field reports, timber types. Like, I look for specific parameters that allow me to essentially say if the block or the area that I've been looking at is ready or potentially ready for harvest in a couple of years. And essentially, that's kind of what the differences are, is that office and field go hand in hand. Field work happens because it needs to be done. It's boots on the ground kind of work, but you can't do boots on the ground without having a solid foundation in the office. And that's a big, big thing. And so what I actually do in the office is that I will sit down usually in the morning and go over the areas or the blocks that I've looked at or that have been looked at by my crew. And then I will generate maps for them, throw my tracks, and I have points that we made with our Garmins. I'll go in more detail about that and whenever about the field aspect. And essentially, I bring up these maps. I get to color for about 20 minutes, and then I get to generate a timber type based on the information that I gained from being in the field. So the field aspect, I gain plot cards and topography notes, and those I will use in the office to generate specific maps, so type maps, slope maps, and then I'll take the cards and I'll make a compilation out of them, and it will there's this big fancy program that generates all the handy dandy stats that I need. And then once all that's done, I sit down on Microsoft Word or whatever I'm using, and I will generate a timber report. And by that time, I'll have an idea, by looking through pictures and all that, to see if the type or the block is going to be harvestable. And so that's essentially the office portion. So my second point, or I guess it's the third point that I'm going to make about office work, is kind of what my favorite thing to do about office work compared to field work. And essentially being in the office, I get the time to actually sit down and think about things, talk about things, discuss other things with my supervisors, and it gives me time to actually think about things, not just go out, be brainless, walk around in the forest. I mean, again, it's not brain numbing work, so don't get me wrong. But I mean, my favorite thing is the fact that I get to just be myself. I can sit down at my desk, put my headphones in, throw on a podcast, or most likely I just listen to music, and I just do my work. I get 3 to 4 reports done in a day. Like that's with all the maps and the write-ups and the compilations done, and then I get to do like photo documentations. So it's a big process. And so I guess my favorite portion of the day is just sitting down and actually doing the write-ups, looking at everything, making sure that I'm wording the stuff properly, because you never know. Like sometimes when you're doing the work, people just kind of half-ass it and don't care. And I take pride in my office work for some reason, because that's just who I am. I don't like things being half done or half typed out. Like I want things to be proper for whenever the client sits down and reads these reports, because I'm the last line of defense essentially when it comes to the wood. If I'm recommending something for harvest and it shouldn't be harvested, it's just going to be destroyed. And I want to make sure that I'm sustaining a proper level of just a professionalism when it comes to forestry, because I want to make sure that we're taking stuff that needs to be taken. If it's dead, salvage bugwood, I mean, by all means take it. But if it's young, green timber, I think we should be keeping that for future generation, because without forests, there's nothing. So I guess my favorite part of the job in the office would have to be sitting down and just making sure my reports are up to specs. But I mean, don't get me wrong, the field aspect, I love the field. I can sit in the field weeks in, weeks out, because that's normally what I do. And my favorite part about being in the field is just being in nature. I get to look at timber that maybe no one's walked through before. Maybe I'm the 18th person who's been in there. That's a really random number, but it's not unlikely. So my favorite aspect of the field is the data collection, and essentially going through the data, making sure the data is proper. I mean, anyone can go out to the forest and write random notes. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's kind of easy to just do that. But whenever I go out, I take pride in my job, and my professionalism gets right down to the bare bones of making sure that timber is proper for harvest. Making sure that we're following the specs and just not taking anything that we shouldn't be taking. Like there's lots of habitat that's destroyed because of forestry, but there's also lots of habitat that's gained from forestry, because these dead stands with all these snags and stuff, that's not prime habitat for moose or deer or your ungulates. And like fur bearers, they do mind like staying in blowdown and whatnot. It gives them cover, but again, it's not feasible all the time to have snags everywhere. Without having snags everywhere, though, I mean, it comes right down to nesting areas for birds, but birds don't like to be nesting in really crappy areas. They like high up canopies with like aspen or tall spruce. But I mean, when it really comes down to it, I prefer field over office. I get more hours when I'm in the field compared to office, but all in all, my those are the kind of the favorite things I like to do in both aspects. Perks of the job of both sides, though. The perks of being in the field, again, lean heavily on the fact that I'm staying fit and I'm just being outside. I'm getting fresh air. That's a big, big pro. But the cons of being outside all the time is I wear my body down so much. Like, I'm out in the cold, I'm out in the hot. Like, my body aches some days. It's just like, wow, I'm putting it through so much stuff and so much stress. But I mean, all in all, my body just gets better and better. Like, I'm more in shape and kind of peak physically whenever it comes to the field. But the office has its pros and cons as well. Like, I mean, pros for the office is I get rest time. I get to sit in the office, I do my 8 hours, and I get to rest. I just sit at my desk, do my thing, go out for lunch with the supervisors every now and then, do do that kind of stuff. But the cons of being in the office is that I don't get to experience as much as I would like whenever I'm in the office. So, like, I get kind of shoved to the side, and I don't get shown much. But I mean, that's going to be changing in the next couple of months. But I mean, when it gets right down to it, it's not worth spending all your time in the office because you're not getting any benefit from being in the office all the time. Whenever you have so much stuff that needs to be done in the field, and then it's not getting done. So, I mean, being in the office compared to being in the field, I'd rather be in the field. Perks of the job, both jobs, I mean, again, it kind of relays into pros and cons. Perk of being outside all the time is you get physically fit. Mentally, you're doing great. Emotionally, you don't really have much to worry about other than, I mean, potentially trees crashing down on you. But I mean, the odds of that are, I don't know what the odds of that are. I'm not going to place odds on that. But I mean, ideally, the perks of being in the office is that A, you're not out in the cold all the time or not out in the heat. But I mean, when it comes right down to it, I mean, you don't get too many perks in either position. So, yeah, I think that's just ideally how things go between office and field. I think my conclusion on that is just do what you find is best for you. If you, for some reason, find yourself getting into the line of forestry, but you want to be more of an office worker, express it. I mean, you're probably going to have some schooling behind you. See, whereas I don't have any schooling behind me for forestry, I just like to be in the field because it means less hassle when it comes right down to the actual calculations and whatnot. Because, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'll sit there and scratch my head for a good 10-15 minutes if I have an issue before I approach my supervisor because I just want to make sure that I'm doing it to my best ability. So again, I guess that's a pro in the office is that I get to learn those things. But ideally, if you got some schooling behind you, and you want to be in the office, go for it. But again, if you have schooling behind you and you want to be in the field, you should be in the field a bit more because you get to express your the skills that you learned whenever you were in school. But I mean, all in all, it gets right down to what your likability is for office compared to field. So for my case, my likability is kind of 50-50. It's probably leaning more towards like a 70-30. 70% field, 30% office. I don't mind an office day every here and there. Just to kind of recoup my body and, kind of get ready for a really tough day if it comes up. So with that being said, yeah, that's going to be the differences between office and field. And just with that being said, guys and girls, I want to bring this opportunity to you guys to say that I'm going to start possibly doing some subscription-based content. So maybe post twice a week, just kind of random stories, exclusive content. I'm thinking about putting it down to like a 99 cents a month. If you want to be a part of that, reach out. I'm going to be doing it mostly on Spotify. This podcast is going to be free for everyone still. So no matter what, the podcast will be free to everybody. The exclusive content being little like short stories, events that are going to be going on within work, stuff like that. That's going to be mainly exclusive content. But I mean, I'm going to give it a bit before I start just kind of doing that. I don't want to go too much into depth of that because I'm just starting out with this podcast. But I mean, it's an idea, and I'm ready to take on ideas if you guys are willing to express them to me. So don't be afraid to do some questions and voice memos and whatnot. So with that being said, thank you for listening to this episode of Office vs. Field, and we'll talk to you guys again next time. Thank you very much.